Hello, welcome to today's edition of the Academy. Today we're going to pick up where we left off last week, talking about massing the effects of fire. This is out of the U.S. Army Manual for Infantry, Platoons, and Squads. Now, as I said in the previous video, this manual actually deals with the level of military action that we normally play on the tabletop, which is small unit, whether platoon or squad level. Okay. In those games, we have supporting equipment, supporting arms that can help support the platoon or squads, right? So this does fit in very well. Now, with the section we're going to be talking about now, we're going to talk more about the factors you need to consider when you're actually planning these fires. Last week we talked about your threat prioritization, and then planning when you're going to, which units you're going to fire, taking into account effects and accuracy, as well as when are you going to stop? When are you going to stop shooting at that particular unit and switch fire to the next priority? Those are important, but let's talk in more detail about how you actually plan your fires. So we're going to pick up with basically sentence 9 in section 2, or I guess it's section 9 out of chapter 2, and it basically says that leaders, this is whether it's platoon or leaders or squad leaders, concentrate the effects of combat power at a decisive place. First, leaders develop targets, target reference points, and sectors of fire to integrate the effects of fires and maneuver within the terrain. Second, they select positions that maximize cover and concealment, and place security elements to enhance protection. Third, they seek information from reconnaissance and surveillance elements to determine enemy dispositions and intentions. Finally, they exercise battlefield leadership before and after contact by making bold decisions and synchronizing other elements of combat power. There's a lot in that paragraph, right? However, if you think about it, this is really describing what we do as the wargaming general. We're really not generals. We're more like platoon leaders, company leaders maybe. The idea, again, here being developing your targets and placing your units to create zones of fire, and then selecting those positions to maximize cover. We should be doing anyway. Some games don't really, cover doesn't have such a big impact anymore, or in some systems. Others, it has an important impact. It depends on the nature of the game, right? So the next section actually is developing the fire plan, talks about the fire plan, and that's what we want to focus on in this particular video. The fire plan is developed concurrently with the leader's scheme of maneuver. So remember, you're talking about movement of your troops as well as the fire. You got to coordinate them in as much detail as time will allow. Obviously, tournaments, you don't have a lot of time because you don't have a lot of advance warning of what your opponent's bringing, as you do in a friendly game when you can kind of slowly, shoot the breeze, talk a bit, look at each other's armies, and just start talking through the game and begin to play. Very slow, relaxed pace. Anyway, when developing his fire plan, the leader considers the following: the use of all available assets, the enemy situation, disposition, and terrain, the nature of the effects the nature of the targets and the effects desired, the availability of ammunition and the soldier's combat load, time of fire, which is initiation of fires, duration and rate and ceasefires, schedule and on-call fires, use of smoke and illumination, and means of communication. These are the things you think of in your fire plan. Now, that's a lot of detail, but I think it's important to look at those types of details to really start thinking about the things we sometimes maybe forget. So let's kind of go through briefly what some of these are. Obviously, using all available assets. You've got your entire army in front of you and all their abilities. You're going to use those to make your plan, right? Don't forget the enemy situation. Which units are where, in what terrain, what their disposition is at any given point. Remember, they could be struggling with morale, they could be full strength, they could be whittled down to become less, not as strong as they were, or maybe more susceptible to fires. Remember, some games, there's a morale effect or a morale mechanism where if the unit loses half of its models in the turn, it takes a morale check, right? Well, if that's the case, then smaller units are easier to get that effect. So understanding that's the disposition of the enemy unit. Are they more susceptible to a morale effect or not. Now, the nature of the targets and the effects desired is an important one that we probably don't think enough about. We just essentially think in terms of shooting to kill, or shooting to, just pour fire, make them roll enough dice. But what you want to always compare is, what is it you're trying to accomplish? What's the desired effect? Do you want to suppress the unit? Do you want to make it run away? Do you want to make it lessen its capability to attack you, minimize its threat? Make it harder for it to act and move on the field. Again, each game system has its own mechanics. You got to think those effects through for that particular game system. Once you've decided that, then think about all the availability of whatever ammunition, if you will. Combat load is not really important here, but the ammunition available to you is. There may be, in some games, a single unit can choose different types of ammunition rounds to fire. You need to choose the right one. Sometimes it's not always obvious. I'll give a couple different examples. In the case of 40K, where you have a weapon system, a couple different weapon systems on a vehicle, which one is going to do the most damage to a particular unit? Well, if you have a unit of infantry, obviously the machine guns are going to have more of an impact than the heavy cannon up top. Now, some cannons are better at hitting multiple models than others are. So, deciding in an anti-tank weapon vehicle that, let's say, it has a las cannon, it's going to shoot one model and probably kill it because it does D6 damage, right? But it's got machine guns on it as well, which can do 3 shots. So the 3 shots are more likely to go against an infantry unit than that one las cannon shot, right? Obviously, that's a pretty simple thing to think through, a simple evaluation to make. Let's switch to bolt action, where you're trying to shoot at a tank. Do you go armor piercing? Duh. Or HE? Huh? Well, think about it before you make your decision. Are you trying to kill the tank right out, disable it? Yes, there's value in that, but what are the odds of you being able to do that? Especially with a lighter, relatively speaking, a lighter gun compared to the enemy tank. Or do you maybe go with an HE round? Yes, you're not likely to damage it. However, because of the pinning mechanism with vehicles in bolt action, you might actually be able to do multiple pins. So even if you fail to fail to penetrate the armor, instead of doing one pin, you will maybe do 2 or 3. In some cases, up to 6. That's a lot of that. That really affects the effectiveness of that model that on the opponent's side. So yeah, you didn't try to kill it with the armor-piercing round. You actually tried to suppress it with an HE round. It's a decision you need to make. Again, choose the ammunition. What is the desired effect? And after deciding that, pick the best round for the job, right? Now, we move on to time of fire, which is all about initiation, duration, and ceasing fire, right? Which we talked about last week. Your plan includes when do you start shooting at it, how much do you shoot at it. You got to make adjustments in there based on the effects you're achieving, and when do you finally stop? Do you stop when it's dead, or do you stop when you've suppressed it sufficiently that it's no longer a threat, or no longer the greatest threat facing you, right? Make that decision each time you're choosing a target. Then there's a concept in here, a thing that you're going to think about called scheduled and on-call fires. Now think of these things. There are some game systems where you have, they're not units on your table necessarily they're shooting. Maybe they have the ability to call in basically shots from off the table. Or there's a predetermined point within the game where some effect is going to be applied. It's scheduled. You need to build that into your plan. When is it the best time to bring that to bear? With scheduled, you need to make sure everything is in position so that the scheduled fire can take maximum effect. So you may need to soften up certain units in order to make that fire more effective. In the case of on-call fires, again, you need to figure out, with depending on how the on-call mechanism works, how do you actually engage it on that battlefield during that game? What's the right timing? And which units are you really going to try to engage with that? Or do you wait for a better opportunity? All those kind of things have to come into those plans, right? Now, using of smoke and illumination, this is interesting. Some systems actually apply these, some don't. Do you, if you have a night fighting scenario, do you waste a unit's shots to send out for example, a HE round? Instead of shooting an HE round at something maybe missing, you actually instead launch a flare type illumination round, which makes everything else shoot better. Yes, you're using one of your stronger units, giving up its shooting, but you maybe get a better effect somewhere else. Or maybe you need to shoot smoke downrange to minimize the effect the opponent, maybe mask it, your movement, make it harder for them to shoot you, things like that. You need to think of those in terms of your fire plan as well. Again, also it comes into play when you're thinking about types of ammunition. What's the desired effect? If I don't want necessarily, if I just need to keep the opponent from seeing me, I may just want to throw a smoke round downfield instead of suppressing him so his shots are less effective. His shots will be completely ineffective if he can't see me, hence the smoke round, right? But in some systems, right? So always consider that in your options. And finally, it talks about means of communication. Now, this particular part isn't as important, however. If the game system includes any type of what I'll call fog of war or command and control mechanism, such as bolt actions, order, morale roll, order roll, dice roll, order check, or there's a orders ability like in 40K where you have the ability to actually issue a particular order. You have to consider those things within your plan, because those will either enhance or, in some cases, actually detract from your fire plan. So you need to consider those within this. Again, in this video we've talked about a lot of information, so I encourage you to kind of go through again and see just what it is you're going to use to plan into your next game. Now what I'll do at the end of this video, I'll put a short title up where you'll be able to see these different points, and just pause it, jot them down on a note card, or I'll copy them out of the description. I'll put them in the description as well, and see what you can come up with as far as how you can apply some of these concepts that the military actually uses at the small unit level to make your gaming experience more successful. All right, hope you learned something from this one. Please feel free to comment below. Let me know, your thoughts on this. I know there are some out there who don't think that there's any real value looking at actual military tactics, and because they don't apply to tabletop. Well, I'm open to discussion. Again, I do believe there is. Maybe there's perspectives out there that we can share. So share, like, and subscribe if you haven't already, and please let me know what you think below. Until then, until next week, when I see you in the next academy, so long. Bye-bye.